Hello, and welcome to Regrets I've Had a Few. I'm Paul Hunter, Artistic Director of Told by an Idiot, and this is a podcast where I talk to friends and colleagues delving into what made them the person they are today.
Hello, and welcome. My guest this month is a director who's been at the forefront of British regional theatre for the past 25 years. As Artistic Director of two of the North's leading producing houses, he is equally at home with the classics and new writing. Welcome, Mark Babych.
Hi, Paul. What a lovely introduction.
Well,
Thank you.
it's totally deserved. I have to come clean to listeners and say, obviously, we have a friendship and a working relationship going back many years, which we will touch on when you brilliantly invited me to become your associate at the Bolton Octagon many moons ago. But I will touch on that later on. Mark, what we do at this stage, I ask my guests to try and recall their earliest theatre experience, whether you were taken by your family or by school, and what do you remember of it, and what did you see and where?
We were lucky at the time. I mean, I'm from Stockport, and there used to be a theatre just around the corner called the Davenport Theatre, and every Christmas, like many other people, my parents took me to the pantomime there, and amazingly, it had some incredible people in it. Les Dawson, in particular,
Wow.
was leading the line, and when I was kind of old enough to con my way into pubs for the odd shandy, you'd see Les having his pre-show drink and post-show drinking there, and very happy talking to the customers. So, it was, I think Les Dawson was probably my first, and I didn't know it at the time, but my first experience there of just on a stage in a cinema.
I have to say, being in awe of the late, great Les Dawson, that's a fairly impressive first encounter with show business, Mark, there. Do you remember, would he play the dame in the pantos? Or, because he's
Yeah,
but yeah.
yeah. It's obviously a long time ago now, so it's all downhill from there, really, in my big formative experience here.
That's the beginning of a extraordinary journey. Wow. And was this a regular thing? You go every year with your family?
We go most years to there. Yeah, we did until really my interest in theatre. I don't think it was cooking then, really. I only really began to cook when I was at school. I went to the school opposite Stockport School, and I did, like many people, had a series of brilliant teachers, music teacher, English teachers, and the school play was the main thing I got involved in, really, as a performer.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, this is what intrigued. I was about to ask that. And what sort of age were you then when you were getting into the school plays and stuff?
13, 14, maybe. Yeah. I'd had a brief interest in it when I was at primary school, where, you know, one of the teachers used to have a play on in this school hall. I remember sitting at the back. I was too shy in those days. I was sitting in the back going, I'd love to be part of that. And there was a really cool, this shows you how old I am, there was a really cool bit that the teacher was getting them to mime along to Children of the Revolution. And I thought, that's really cool. I'd like to do that. But I was actually too shy to put myself forward for it, really, at the time.
It's interesting, like you say, that does sound cool, by the way. Yeah, the miming to Children of the Revolution, exactly. But it's interesting you say about that shyness and teachers that kind of maybe supported or provoked you a bit as you got older. And this is something you often hear, I suppose, with some performers, I suppose. Even though you obviously had that shyness, you were drawn to performing. You wanted to have a go and get up there and do it.
I just loved the stage, really. I remember going onto the school stage in Stockport School and thinking this was like there was nothing like it, the magic of it. I mean, it was pretty basic, but it just felt magic to me. And I wasn't bad academically, but nothing sort of stirred the heart more than that, really. And just being part of a big gang doing these shows. I mean, I hadn't a clue what I was saying on stage in the first show. My first line in the show was from Henry IV's parts 1 and 2, mashed together, called The Fortunes of Falstaff, and it was Anon Anon, sir. And I had no idea what Anon meant. No one told me. I just made it up.
Wow, what a kind of introduction! Also, introduction to Shakespeare, I suppose. Yes, and what about obviously where you're from, in and around there? There's some very wonderful theatres. Did you go on school trips to places like the Royal Exchange or things like that? Or
Didn't go on a school trip to the Royal Exchange, although I went to the Royal Exchange. I was trying to recall what I saw at that point. Talking about the late 70s into the early 80s. So far, when there was more than the triumvirate of the artistic directors, Caspar Hager and all those people, Michael Elliott.
Michael Edit? Wow.
Yeah, brilliant directors in many, many ways. And there was John Thor doing all My Sons, I think. Yeah. Max Wall.
Now I'm even more envious. We start with Les Dawson, and you casually throw in Max Wall, one of my heroes.
Well, there's a through line to you there, Paul, in your comedic genius, things that I'm naturally drawn to.
What?
I mean, actually,
Sure.
I think I was waiting for Godot. A long time ago now. There was famously a big picture of him on the Royal Exchange wall for many years.
Yes, there was. I remember that in that extraordinary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, there was. God.
Yeah. But no school trips there. But I mean, I guess we used to be taken to the Ludlow Festival and the RSC, and it ranged from Simon and McCorkindale doing Macbeth but in the outdoors to I think the show that I genuinely got, oh, this is ace, was Derek Jacobi and Sinead Cusack in Much Ado, with the most exquisite design by Ralph Coltire. And I always remember that it was a gold set, and I sat in the auditorium going, this is beautiful, because I was also interested in art as well. Art was my other thing at school.
And where was this production?
That was at the RSC, the old RSC in Stratford, the old building. Yeah, long gone. Yeah.
So you clearly, the interest is fired up through performing the school plays, and then obviously going to see some great stuff at the Exchange and at RSC and elsewhere. At what point did it become something that you thought, I might like to try and do this? Or did that come after college or pre-college? When did it start to percolate for you?
Definitely started at school, and grew throughout that. So the more performing I did, I wasn't a great performer. I could get my way through from A to B, and actually I didn't come from a family who was very interested in going to the theatre or had much experience of a part in pantomime. None of my friends did it, so I was a kind of bit of an oddity as far as that was concerned. And I remember the school's careers teacher. You didn't get much school's career advice in those days. You literally had to walk into a room and someone would say, "There's a lot of leaflets there, lads. Just have a look at them and see what you fancy." And I do remember this because I was interested in art. I said to the teacher, I quite fancy graphic design. And oh no, there's no future in graphic design, lad. There's no future in graphic design. And then plucked out of the air, I said, "Well, I quite fancy being an actor." He said, "Yeah, not bad at that. Why don't you give that a little go?"
And then what was the journey then? From then on, then college?
Basically, I applied to universities. I didn't think drama school was going to be a thing for me because I was never a member of a youth theatre. I only ever did the school play, so you could say I came at it somewhat naively. And I went to I looked around a few universities. Birmingham was one. It's your hometown. And I eventually ended up at Kent University doing drama and theatre studies was my degree.
And how was that?
Well, it was a mixture of academic work and practical work. And I still wasn't sure whether it was for me, really, because what I wanted to do was sort of do stuff, really. And I found myself writing a lot of essays. And in the first year in particular, um, doing lots of things humanities-wise and philosophy. And I was thinking, this wasn't really what I really signed up for, really. Um, and there was a sort of pivotal moment, really, where I soon quickly realized that I wasn't that great an actor because there was people in my year and above me who were far more skilled and naturally drawn to it than I was, really. Um, I just wasn't. I just wasn't as good as I imagined I was at school.
Mm.
Which came at the time as a bit of a shock, really. In fact, I was probably more interested in playing in bands at the time. So music was another thing that I was naturally drawn to do.
Music, art. And what was this turning point you referred to?
So I think somewhere halfway through my first year, I was living in Halls of Residence, and somebody from the Drama Society knocked on my door and said, someone's dropped out of directing this play. Do you fancy doing it? Now, I never directed before in my life, really, and had no idea how to do it. But as is typical of me, like, I sort of jump into the water. And I quite like doing things I don't know how to do. I think that's been like something that's been quite common in my career. Is like, I'm not afraid to do things that I don't know how to do. It terrifies the life out of me, but kind of what keeps the creative engine going, really. I'm too comfortable in something and I don't enjoy it as much. I like wrestling with that. And so the play was Epps and Downs by Howard Brenton, which was set on Derby Day in 1977. Very famously, I think, at the Royal Court at Beach. I think it was a joint stock production. Stafford Clark did. Very famously featured a bunch of naked actors playing horses. So my first challenge was how am I going to do this? But yeah, that was the turning point, really, when I thought, yeah, this might be something I might be quite okay at.
And then did you direct more as you went through university then?
I didn't direct anything else until I did my final year. My final year was primarily, well, all of it was directing, really. And we had
What did you do in that final year? What sort of shows were you doing?
So my first one was a production of Athol Fugard's The Island. And from there, I got a great love of Athol Fugard's work, and I was a big fan of the Market Theatre Johannesburg, and subsequently, I've formed friendships with those people. And I remember a tutor who's passed away a long time ago now, but actually saying to me, that was incredible, and I didn't know it was incredible. And he said the power of that play and what that play has to say in the hands of those two people, and given the history of how that play was made me really think about things I'd never really thought about before, about why and how a piece of art is made, what draws people to make that work. It was incredibly powerful piece of work, great two-handed play. Then after that, actually the polar opposite of that play was Stephen Berkoff's East. And I think I was just experimenting at the time, really, between form, really. And I thought, well, I've done that style of play. I now want to do this style of play, which was stylistically so different. Content-wise, ridiculous. I mean, Berkoff was huge when I was at university.
Same for me. No, it was a very big presence, wasn't it, Berkoff? I mean, to the point where I think drama schools stopped people doing Berkoff pieces. They were seeing so many at the auditions and stuff. So you leave university, and then how and where do you get your first professional directing gig?
It was quite a long time after I left, really. I mean, I had a year in Australia just taking some time out really and enjoying life. And when I came back to the UK, I started applying for things like the Regional Theatre Young Directors Scheme. There was a scheme at the Court. There was something at the Orange Tree. I just kept missing out, really. And then I thought, I probably need to think about approaching this a different way, really. Because what I hadn't really sussed out was how I'd make that bridge between doing well at university and then going out into the big wide world and trying to get into the industry. And so what I did was, in those days, jobs were advertised in the stage every week.
Yes, I remember in the back of the stage. Yes, definitely.
You remember that? Eagerly get the stage every week and go, well, what jobs can I apply for now? And there was a hell of a lot of actor-teacher jobs going. So I thought, well, okay, I'll just throw my hands to the ring of that. I can do a bit of singing and do a bit of playing instruments, and I'm not awful as an actor, but maybe I'll get better. So I went for loads of auditions, like loads. Didn't get anything, but I went for loads. And what I did was along the way, I picked up loads of great exercises, acting exercises. Well, if I was ever asked to do a workshop, which I subsequently was, I had a sort of arsenal of stuff, really. I suppose I was almost training myself in the how and the what, and how does a room work? How do you run a room? What makes it work? There was an awful lot of devising in those processes. I got to dip my toe in a lot of areas that I wouldn't ordinarily done, and then I got a job. My first job really was as a youth theatre director at Ball Nottingham, and it was a small youth theatre festival for about 2 or 3 weeks over the summer, and working on some new plays that young writers had written. And I remember one in particular. Andy Hay was the artistic director at the time. What was I doing? It was backstage at Bolton. As you know, Bolton's got a very small backstage. And I was sort of in a corridor painting something and nailing something together. And Andy was going, that's what I like to see, like young directors, like getting their hands dirty. I thought, oh, this sounds like a nice branding place. And at the same time all that was happening, Jim Cartwright was writing the play 2 for Sue Johnston and John McArdle. So I got to sort of see Jim's numerous drafts of that and got to see a playwright in action, really. And then I was there on the first ever performance of that play, which blew my socks off, really. And then, of course, years later, I get to be the artistic director there. So,
well, obviously now you can't mention Bolton without it being our meeting in a sense. And it's interesting when you say about someone knocking on your door and saying, "Do you want to direct this play?" You talked about being at college. I remember similarly, not metaphorically or via my mobile or wherever, you knocking on my door and saying, you'd seen me in some things as an actor, and then you early days had told me it, and then you said out of the blue, "Do you want to direct The Beauty Queen of Lenham by Martin McDonagh? Would it interest you?" And I'd heard of Martin McDonagh, but I didn't know his plays. And I remember at that time you asked me that. I went to Waterstones in Piccadilly and I found a copy and I sat and read it in Waterstones. I didn't want to splash out at that point, Mark, in case I said no. And I read it and I laughed out loud on my own in Waterstones. I thought, this is extraordinary. And I remember going back to you saying, well, I haven't really directed any text, but if you've got some faith, I'd love to give it a go because I love the play. And you did brilliantly support me. And I came up to Bolton and did that play. And then subsequently, you asked me to join as an associate. And I think my abiding memory of that period, some 3 or 4 years when I was around you and hopefully supporting you in what your job was the kind of spirit that you engendered in the place, and I often felt this in the shows I directed there with my companies. They always talked about the atmosphere and the spirit. And the biggest credit I can pay it is my partner, Sarah Jane, who's not a big fan of press nights, certainly not London press nights. She said, "Oh, I like the Bolton press nights. It's much more friendly." And I thought that was a very sort of symptomatic of your leadership in a way. I suppose in a roundabout way, and my question, I suppose, is I all well, I always felt that you were obviously directing the shows that you wanted to direct, and you were trying to program all of that. As an artistic director, do you sometimes feel that you would program something that might not be your taste, but you think it could play well for your audience, if that makes sense? Does that ever come into the mix, or is it always stuff that you are totally driven by?
So I think we got like many audiences really. So there certainly have been things that I'm not a natural fit for, in terms of, but I think our audience might like. So I was programming for the audiences that I think are in the constituency of the organization's place, how it reflects the people of the place. And then that's about sort of balancing your own kind of wish list with, okay, so what does it do? How can this organization best serve its constituents, its communities, the place where it exists? And not everything would be things that I absolutely adore, really. I suppose it always had a thread through it, though, that I think it had something to say to people, really. It needed to be of relevance, and have quality in there. Whatever form it was or whatever genre it was, is this a good example of what it is? And like one of the many reasons, I was drawn to work with you, Paul, was that I'd seen the style of theatre making and that you make, and seen how great you were as a performer. And I thought, well, here's someone who really knows about actors, really knows about theatre making. Wouldn't it be? And they're so different to my approach. And I think the blend of that stuff just opens up possibilities for the program and the way you tell those stories. I mean, one of my favorite productions of yours was Accidental Death of an Anarchist.
Oh, likewise. I adored that. I adored making it in Bolton, again, to come back to your audiences, smart, resolutely honest and forthright in their reaction. But they really responded to that production, not just the comedy, the great comedy of Dario Fo, but the politics, the provocation, and it was a perfect fit, I felt, between audience and play. So no, I loved those audiences there. And then, of course, amidst other things, of course, lots of other stuff you've done, you now and you then still are running another of the great theatres, Whole Truck. And I suppose my question around that is, of course, Bolton has a very rich legacy at the Octagon. Of course, he does. I suppose my question around the Whole Truck is that you've got some very big personalities that established that, like the late great Mike Bradwell and John Godber, and these figures must have loomed large in that history and indeed the currency of that building. What was it like coming in following people like that, I suppose, into an organization?
Well, I mean, I won't lie, it was quite scary at the time because Truck had a very in the new, Truck had moved into a new building in 2009, and I often described that from the outside as feeling like the world's most difficult birth. Because what you had, and it was well, when Mike Bradwell like put an advert in Time Out in, was it 1971? Said top forms theatre company seeks other half. And Mike and I worked together on a number of occasions, and in fact in 2022, Richard Bean wrote a play for our 50th anniversary, which celebrated the origins of Whole Truck Theatre, both 71 Coltman Street, in which Mike Bradwell was the leading figure. And I just thought at the time, the idea of starting a theatre company in one of the most economically deprived cities of the UK, whose fishing industry was in terminal decline, was quite radical, really. But as he explained to me at the time, he said, "Well, you could sign on, you could still make your art, but the state would basically subsidize you." Because it was a lot more than that, his work was very much based in people and place, and the stuff that wasn't probably you were seeing in the boulevard theatres in London and around the regions, really. They were doing something very particular. And, as we know, Mike was an incredible life force, really. And, since he's passed away, there's numerous writers have spoken to, said he was the most brilliant dramaturg and owe a lot to him for that. And so, he had an enormous impact obviously in the birth of the company. And then obviously John Godber was there for 25 years, I think, 25 years. And John left. And then John was very responsible to the move from Spring Street, which was this small but very well loved and supported small theatre, and pretty much near the site where the building is now, and to move into a like £15 million brand new building. I think it was tricky because there was some artistic differences, there was some funding challenges, change of personnel, and so there was a big job to do culturally as well as artistically, really. And I felt an enormous sense of responsibility, but also it was going to be difficult, really. And for a couple of years, it felt difficult. But I always believed, and with my colleague Chancy Mills-Ward, who's we are basically executive of that team. We're joint chief executives. We're both passionate about like not letting the humps and bumps of running a theatre get in the way of what I believe to be its central purpose, which is to serve the city of Hull and East Yorkshire, and to make sure that there was something to be celebrated and something to be valued about making art in that region. That couldn't be allowed to go away, really. And we had to make some really, really difficult decisions about, how we moved the company forward. And slowly but surely, we began to turn it around. And the work was going to be very, very different. It wasn't going to be John. It wasn't going to be Mike's early work. It was going to be partnerships that we had built through various working in other regional theatres. And of course, as everybody knows, the funding landscape at the moment is extremely challenging. So you have to be smart, really. I mean, you still have to hold on to your ambition, but the heart of it really is, do we want high quality, excellent art right on your doorstep for people to access at accessible, affordable prices and multiple access points? Do we want that as part of what makes a great place to live, work, grow up in, have families in? Just part of the rich texture of life, which gives joy, because God knows we need a bit of that, don't we?
Well, I would say certainly you've delivered that and continue to deliver that. And I certainly know from friends who have worked there on a regular basis and have gone up there that the passion you speak with about the importance of that and interesting serving the community. I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. You've done that brilliantly. Mark, we've drawn to the end of a really lovely chat, and it's been lovely catching up with you and also hearing about, your kind of vision around the theatre as well has always been inspiring for me. So we need to get together soon. I always finish, Mark, with asking 7 rapid fire questions to which you don't need to think about them. You just need to say your first response. Here we go. Martin McDonough or Conor McPherson?
Oh, Conor McPherson.
Canal boat holiday or camping?
Canal boat.
This is to do with you as a director here. Extra tech time or more previews?
More previews.
Julie Walters or Victoria Wood?
Oh no, that's a horrible one. Both.
Both, perfect. Someone who I know does brilliant Christmas shows, Pinocchio or Alice in Wonderland?
Pinocchio.
It's again someone who runs a venue. Trouble behind the bar or trouble in the toilets? Which would be the one you'd take?
Well, given the conversation about toilets at the moment, I'm going for trouble behind the bar.
Scarborough or Blackpool?
Oh, Scarborough.
Excellent. Mark, it's been lovely to see you, and thanks for today.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Paul.
Cheers, Mark. All the best, mate.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Dear listeners, if you've enjoyed this idiot podcast, please spread the word